Hello everyone, welcome to Daily News Simplified, a simple and smart way of covering the newspaper for the civil service examination. We will have a discussion on today's newspaper, the Hindu Delhi edition, dated 4th April 2020. The article we'll be taking up for the discussion has been shown on the screen. The time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is a news on page number 10, an essay to be filed against six for harassing nurses. National Security Act has been very prominently in news since last 2 years. It's a very important topic for the mains examination, although it can also be asked in the prelims exam because UPSC has been asking about acts and bills very prominently in the prelims exam as well. In the mains exam, it can be asked either in GS paper 2 under Polity and Governance or in GS paper 3 under the section of Security. In our discussion, we are going to do a comprehensive analysis of National Security Act 1980. The first and the most important thing to know about National Security Act 1980 is it's a legislation on preventive detention. It empowers both the central government and the state government to do preventive detention, and the conditions under which it can be done also has been specified in the law. But since they are so open-ended, they are vulnerable to subjective interpretation and hence the misuse of the law that we'll talk about in a short while. The conditions mentioned under which preventive detention can be done under NSA are security of India, relation of India with foreign countries, maintenance of public order, maintenance of supplies and services essential to the community, and it can also be done to regulate the movement of foreigners in India and to make arrangements for their expulsion from India. The period of detention is 3 months initially, but it can be increased stepwise with 3 months at each step. But the detention total period shouldn't increase 12 months. But if the authorities come up with new evidence, then the 12 months detention can also be increased. But with the same piece of evidence, the detention cannot be more than 12 months. There is a body called as Advisory Board, which has a very important role to play in the jurisprudence of NSA. For every detainee, within 3 weeks, the government has to present him or her before the Advisory Board. This advisory board is constituted by 3 people who are eligible to be appointed as a judge of a high court. And this advisory board do the vetting. If the board says that there is sufficient case for detention, the detention will continue. If the board says that there is no sufficient case for detention, the man is set free immediately. But you have to understand a very crucial point here. This advisory board is not mandated to go into the merits of the evidence. That means they will not raise the question on the veracity of the evidence presented to them by the authorities, whether they are right or wrong, whether they have been gathered with due diligence or not. Questions will not be raised on that. They will only see if the presented evidence is sufficient for detention or not. That's it. How they have been gathered, whether they are factually correct or not, those things the advisory board are not mandated to get into. The detained person can appeal before the advisory board, present his case, but he does not have the right to be represented by a lawyer. These are the important provisions of the law that you have to keep in mind in writing any answer in the mains exam. The purpose of NSA is to prevent crime from happening, and preventive detention is at the core of National Security Act. In this context, let's look at the history of preventive detention in India. The first piece of legislation regarding preventive detention came in the form of Bengal Regulation 3 of 1818, which empowered the government to arrest anyone for defense or for maintaining public order without giving the person recourse to judicial proceedings. This was the first time a legislation on preventive detention came up in India. Then you know the infamous Rowlatt Act of 1918, which allowed confinement of a suspect without trial, preventive detention of 2 years in case of political prisoners, and indefinite in case of arrest concerning terrorism. In independent India, Preventive Detention Act 1950 was enacted, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, with a heavy heart, introduced the bill in the parliament because the circumstance at that point of time was such. India was in transition, so the need of this kind of legislation was felt at that time. The act expired on 31st of December 1969. Then MISA, Maintenance of Internal Security Act, a similar act, was enacted in 1971 by Indira Gandhi government, and that was repealed in 1977 by the Janata Party government. Then again in 1980, National Security Act was brought back, and this act exists till today. Normally, an arrested person has the right to be informed of the reason for the arrest, coming from Section 50 of CRPC. They also have the right to bail as per the provision of CRPC, and the person has to be produced before a court within 24 hours of arrest as per certain sections of CRPC. And it has been mentioned under Article 22(1) of the Indian Constitution, an arrested person cannot be denied the right to consult and to be defended by a legal practitioner of his choice. But all these rights are denied to a person arrested under preventive detention, and so by extension a person arrested under National Security Act. Because there's a provision in the Indian Constitution already. Under Article 22(3), the rights available to an arrested person will not be applicable in case of preventive detention. These are the important provisions that you need to know in order to write a good answer for the mains exam. As you would understand that National Security Act is for national interest and public order, so the reason of arrest may not even be given to the person because that information may be very sensitive for national security. So we do not have the year-wise data for the people arrested under National Security Act or in general people under preventive detention. There is no NCRB data on this. However, the 117th Law Commission report of 2001 has given a data that more than 14 lakh people were arrested under preventive provisions in India. But the state-wise, year-wise such data are not available in the NCRB report. Although National Security Act is a very important legislation that should be in place for national security, public order, national integrity, for instance, in the present case of violence and hostility against medical practitioners, it's an important issue that should be dealt very, very strictly. But it is also true that the act is misused. For instance, you will remember the recent case of Manipur journalist who was charged with NSA for a Facebook post that was allegedly against the chief minister of the state. There were also certain cases against cattle traders in Uttar Pradesh and also in Madhya Pradesh against whom NSA were charged, which very well could have been dealt with normal legislations for public order. In fact, you will be surprised to know that the first person to be arrested under Preventive Detention Act 1950 was an eminent person called as A.K. Gopalan in opposition, rather than a person creating public disorder or a threat to national security. So, using these examples, you can set the stage that although it is a necessary evil, there has to be safeguards in place. For instance, it was suggested by eminent jurist Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer that although it's a necessary evil, but there has to be certain institutional measures. For instance, there has to be limitation in the period of detention. It should be brought down from 12 months. And secondly, enough power should be given to the advisory board. First of all, the power of advisory board to vet the cases should be increased. And secondly, the decision of the advisory board should be respected. It has been seen in the past cases that even if the advisory board set the person free, then within hours, new evidences are brought against that person and he is arrested under preventive detention once again. So that kind of misuse of the law should not happen. Although preventive detention is a very important executive tool for law and order, it shouldn't be used as a regular tool to maintain law and order. Preventive detention goes against the heart and soul of the preamble, which is liberty. And liberty is a fundamental constitutional promise. In this regard, preventive detention should be used very, very sparingly. This article has been taken from page number 14. It is titled, Cuban Doctors Fighting Virus Around World. It's a fairly important article for the mains examination. It can be asked under various sections of the syllabus. It can be asked under social justice because Cuba is a very important international case study for developing a good healthcare system. It can also be asked under international relations because of the constrained relationship between United States and Cuba, and also because of the use of health diplomacy by Cuba to overcome the burden of sanctions imposed by United States and to overcome its isolation globally after the revolution of 1959. However, this article has been written in the context of President of United States asking its allies not to take the help of Cuban health machinery because allegedly The revenue earned by the Cuban government is used to push forward the communist agenda. In this article, however, we'll discuss holistically the Cuban health machinery as to why it is so good and how Cuba uses it diplomatically to its advantage. First of all, Cuba is a global leader in providing medical practitioners to the developing countries. Cuba provides more medical personnel in the developing world than G8 countries combined. Cuba has provided developing countries the medical practitioners in the dire need during the time of Ebola, then SARS, MERS, and in the present fight against COVID-19. Cuba, in fact, has got into agreements with United Nations agencies specializing in health. Cuba is running a large scale plan to provide free medical aid and services to the international community, especially to the third world countries, and that is at very nominal charge. There's a term called as disaster tourism, which became famous after Cuba started sending its medical practitioners globally after any medical emergency. In Cuba, healthcare is considered as human rights, and all citizens have access to free health facilities. Cuba's health system emphasizes on preventive and primary healthcare system, which is community based. These two are the most important characteristics of Cuban health system. And if you look at the records, Cuba historically, even before the communist regime took over, have performed much better than other countries in terms of health parameters. For instance, life expectancy is 72.5 years, which is 5 years higher than US. Health workers have already eliminated polio, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, diphtheria from the country, and malnutrition incidence among the age group 1 to 15 years is just 0.7%. See, although the healthcare system of Cuba were developed on humanitarian principles, an ideology of the communist government that came to power after revolution of 1959, it has helped Cuba in more than one ways. The healthcare system of Cuba, coupled with doctors' diplomacy that it deployed globally, has helped it in improving the image abroad and also preventing international isolation. For instance, Cuba's re-establishment of diplomatic relations with many countries, like Honduras in 2002, Guatemala in 1998, were largely because of the health mission of Cuba in these countries. Cuba also developed symbiotic relation with another communist government in Venezuela. Venezuela used to provide Cuba with cheap oils, and in exchange, it used to get medical support from Cuba. Cuba also has this kind of relation with Brazil, where Cuba helps Brazil in running its state-run health scheme by providing medical practitioners, and Brazil pay the doctors coming from Cuba very handsomely. Medical internationalism promoted by Cuban government has helped it in earning hard currency, which otherwise would have been very restricted because of restricted global trade of goods and services of Cuba. Cuba has signed deals with many African nations like Algeria, Kenya, Uganda to trade cash for doctors. And very recently, in 2016, there was rapprochement between United States and Cuba, and the then US president became the first president to visit Cuba in 2016 after 1928. This historic rapprochement was also because of the improved global image of Cuba. That's pretty much about the healthcare system of Cuba. This article is from page number 2. It is titled Capital Records Wettest March in History. This is an important article for GS Paper 1 under the section of Geography. Any macroscopic geographical phenomena that is in current affairs is important for the exam because UPSC has started to ask questions even from the static section in relation to current affairs. For instance, in 2015 they asked this question: Mumbai, Delhi and Kolkata are three major mega cities of the country, but the air pollution is much more serious problem in Delhi as compared to the other two. Why this is so? One of the prominent reasons for this is because of the cold waves sitting on Delhi in the form of fronts and not moving. So the circulation of pollution is not possible, and hence the pollutants, they are confined over the region of Delhi and the surrounding section. But there are other reasons too. But this is a core question of geography, and this was in current affair back then. This was prominently appearing in the newspapers. Similarly, any special macroscopic geographical phenomena that you come across in current affair becomes important for the mains examination. And the news here is that March has brought news of rain from almost the entire country. March is the wettest in the capital, this present March. But to understand this, you have to know another fact, that Feb has been the hottest. So if Feb have been the hottest Feb, it will be only consequential that March will be the wettest March. You understand, if it's hot, it will also get wet. See, rainfall in the month of March is not uncommon. But according to private weather forecasting company SkyMet, what is uncommon is the increased frequency, severity, and duration of rainfall. The most plausible explanation for this comes from cyclonic circulations, which were not common in the month of March, but their frequency has increased over central India. What also has been uncommon is the existence of small weather systems at multiple locations and persisting for longer periods. Now let's come to the basic reason of rainfall in the month of March. Then we'll come back to the question of increased frequency, intensity, and duration of rainfall once again. See, in the month of March, sun starts shining in the northern hemisphere directly. And because of the sun, the heat, high temperature, evaporation intensity increases. When evaporation happens, the water vapor goes up in the sky, forms the cloud, and when the moisture carrying capacity of the cloud is increased, those moistures are shedded down in the form of rain. This is the basic mechanism of rainfall through convection. To understand why it is happening in March with increased intensity, you have to know the fact that February was one of the hottest February in the recent history. So it is only consequential that downpouring of rain will happen more in the month of March. That's one reason. And when the intensity of evaporation increases, it results in thunder clouds called as cumulonimbus clouds. And then the thunderstorm happens and rainfall with higher intensity happens. This is one basic mechanism of rainfall in the month of March. Another reason is because of high intensity winds that result in hail. What happens is in northern hemisphere, as we have talked about, in the March month, the sun has already started to shine in the northern hemisphere. This results in pre-monsoon low pressure. Because of the differential heating of the central India and the coastal region, the central India gets heated more. And because of this, there is low pressure in the central India. This low pressure causes the winds to blow. And when the winds blow, two circulating system collides, there is rise of the wind up in the atmosphere and again causing thunderclouds and thunderstorms. So this is also a mechanism of rainfall in the month of March, and due to this mechanism, there is more turbulence and higher intensity rainfall. There is yet another mechanism of rainfall related to the second one, that is cyclonic circulations. As we have discussed that there is pre-monsoon low pressure because of differential heating and the central India getting more heated than coastal India. Because of this, high intensity wind starts to blow. And if there is sustained low pressure, that wind can actually turn into cyclonic circulations. And when these cyclonic circulations interact with other systems, for example, jet streams, then high intensity rainfall again happens in the central India. This is key to understand as to why the rainfall intensity has increased and why this particular month of March was the wettest month. There will be cyclonic circulations, and this is pretty common in the recent past. But what this cyclonic circulation does is it gets coupled with the jet stream. And now the western disturbance, which is not very prominent in the month of March, starts to become a prominent factor. See, western disturbance is a prominent mechanism of rainfall only during winters because the trough of the jet stream, which is over the northern India, that is no more during the month of March. So this mechanism of rainfall in the month of March in northern India is not there. But because of these cyclonic circulations interacting with the troughs of the jet stream, a new mechanism has been seen to develop over the northern India, and because of this new system of coupling between the cyclonic circulations and the jet streams, the intensity of rainfall has increased. What you also have to keep in mind that this year, both El Nino and Indian Ocean Dipole, they are neutral. And there is high chance that they will remain neutral over the summer. And if that happens, we are going to have very good monsoon this year. As the days of monsoon comes, you have to keep the track of El Nino and Indian Ocean Dipole and the effect they will be causing on the Indian monsoon. This article is from page number 10. It is titled, Plea Seeks Minimum Wage for Migrant Workers. This is an important article both for GS Paper 2 and GS Paper 3. In GS Paper 2, it can be asked in the section of social justice, and GS Paper 3, of course, disaster management. UPSC has always focused on vulnerable section, and every year in the mains exam, they ask one or more vulnerable sections, whether women, old age people, differently abled, construction workers, migrant workers, farmers, MSME, They will definitely touch on one or more. So this is an important news. UPSC, in fact, in GS paper 4 has asked once a case study concerning disaster management and vulnerable sections. There was a state prone to disaster. In fact, disaster happened there, and you had to prioritize different sections stranded in the disaster. This article has been written in the backdrop of petitions filed in the Supreme Court by Harsh Mandar and others seeking minimum payment of wages to the migrant laborers in the aftermath of the lockdown. In response to that, Supreme Court has been seeking response from the central government as to what are the steps taken by the government to mitigate the hardships faced by these migrant laborers after the declaration of the lockdown. The petitioners were demanding the center to activate National Executive Committee and take appropriate steps to provide compensation in the form of payment of minimum wages to these workers. In the DNS 19th March 2020, I have discussed with you the machinery of disaster management in India. There we discussed National Disaster Management Authority, which comes under the aegis of Ministry of Home Affairs, has three important bodies. And the most important body of National Disaster Management Authority is National Executive Committee. This is the body responsible for formulation of policies and the oversight of the implementation of those policies. We presently don't have a policy to deal with COVID-19. We are taking steps in bits and pieces, but there is no holistic policy. And for the policy to be formulated, National Executive Committee has to be activated. Whether National Executive Committee will be activated or not, and whether we will have a comprehensive policy against COVID-19 or not, that's something we have to wait and watch. But Government of India already has invoked many provisions of Disaster Management Act, which you need to know. For instance, as per Section 621 of National Disaster Management Act, National Disaster Management Authority can direct ministries, department and state government to contain the disaster. And many such directives have been given using this section of the law. Home Ministry has given many directives using the power bestowed on it under Section 1021 of the National Disaster Management Act. For example, the order for the lockdown, the order for maintaining social distancing, all of these have been given under the Section 1021 of the National Disaster Management Act. Further, an order directing the establishment to pay wages to the workers. An order directing house owners to desist from taking rent from the migrant laborers in cities. These orders also have been given under the provisions of National Disaster Management Act. Section 72 of National Disaster Management Act empowers the central government to override all the orders of the state and the municipal authorities. Now let's look at some of the sections which can be evoked further to bring social justice and ameliorate the problems of migrant laborers and other vulnerable sections. According to Section 11, a national plan shall be drawn up by the National Executive Committee. It shall contain measures to be taken for the prevention and mitigation of the effect of a disaster. Using this section, National Executive Committee can be activated and can be asked to formulate a policy for COVID-19. Section 12 of the Act requires central government to provide minimum standards of relief to persons affected by disaster. And using this section, the central government can provide minimum wages to the migrant workers. And this section exactly is what is being asked by the petitioners to be used to provide the minimum wages to the migrant laborers. We have come to the end of the discussion for today, but we will not be taking practice questions here. For practice questions, you can go to the e-learning platform. You will find DNS video of every day on that platform. Below every day's DNS video, you will find the prelims quiz. After listening to the DNS video, you can attempt the quiz and see your retention capacity and problem-solving aptitude. Now let's see question for the day. The question is, in times of a disaster like COVID-19 pandemic, which of the following can be done by the government according to National Disaster Management Act 2005? The statements are, a lockdown can be enforced across the country. The government can pay minimum wages to migrant workers in case they are affected by the disaster. A state law can be overridden by an executive order of the center if it is in contravention with the central order. The options are 1 only, 2 only, 1 and 3 only, 1, 2 and 3. Yesterday's question was, which of the following can be used in geofencing an object? Cellular data, RFID, GPS. The answer is D.